Hello and welcome to Ker-VAM, a brand new Doctor Who podcast celebrating the brilliant physical media releases of Doctor Who. We're talking DVDs, Blu-rays, soundtracks, and maybe even the occasional VHS. There's a many a podcast out there where you can hear reviews and discussion on the episodes, but hopefully here you'll find something a little bit different. Of course, it's called Ker-VAM because I was trying to think of a fun name related to Doctor Who DVDs and Blu-rays, and I thought, Kablam was kind of about space Amazon and that kind of thing, and VAM, of course, is the official name for special features on a DVD or Blu-ray value-added material. I know it's all a bit nerdy, isn't it, really? But anyway, we're going to have lots of fun talking about many a DVD, Blu-ray, documentaries, all those kind of things over the coming weeks and months. So hopefully you'll be hearing lots of different voices, but joining me to get things started and hopefully a regular fix of the podcast, it's Ryan and Charlie.
Hello.
So Ryan, can you remember the first Doctor Who DVD you got?
Oh yes, I remember. It was around, I believe it was one Christmas about nearly 2 decades ago when my mum and dad got me both Ark in Space and Genesis of the Daleks, and they were just sort of like my gateway into Doctor Who, so to speak. And ever since then, I've become a Doctor Who fan ever since, and been filling up my collection more and more, even to this day.
Brilliant, yeah, brilliant. Charlie, have you got any favourite sort of DVDs that you own or documentaries or anything like that?
In terms of DVDs, then probably Spearhead from Space Special Edition, that the Doctor story. That's probably my favourite story. Enemy of the World, Keys of Marinus, stories like that I really enjoy. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the making of documentaries as well, and sometimes it can make a story I don't like as much seem a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. And that's certainly a topic that in future podcasts we're going to have a good deep dive into, on whether, a documentary about it can actually change your opinion or your understanding of a story. I think it's really, really fascinating. And Charlie, I believe you've also got a YouTube channel that you're working on as well at the moment.
Yes, I have a Doctor Who-based YouTube channel called Dimension 5 Productions. It's got a decent amount of subscribers now, and mostly I publish like stories that I've written that are Doctor Who based that I publish in audiobook format, similar to like Big Finish, things like that.
Sure, brilliant. Yeah, that's really, really cool. Certainly go and check that out. And I'll just quickly get out of the way the socials for Ker-VAM. I've got a Twitter account at Ker-VAM Pod if you want to go and follow us for all the latest updates and whatnot. And of course, subscribe to the various podcast sites where you're listening to it, or if you're on YouTube, drop us a comment as well. So before we get started on today's topics of conversation, what can you expect from our upcoming podcasts? Among other things, we'll have lots of discussion about the Collection Blu-Ray range, an in-depth look at the history of animations in Doctor Who, and of course the many releases of Shada, plus many other interesting topics. Is there anything you guys are particularly looking forward to discussing over the coming weeks and months?
Well, for me, I'm basically looking forward to where we discuss the topic about whether a certain documentary can either change or improve or decrease our sort of general thoughts on the story. And yeah, the whole discussing about the different versions of Shada has definitely got me interested, definitely.
There's quite a few different releases that we'll have to cover of that one, won't there? But yeah, Charlie, anything for you that you're particularly looking forward to?
I think I agree with Ryan, both of those, like Shada. I've never even watched Shada, but just the story behind it seems really interesting to me. So I'd like to talk about that. And like you said, Ryan, the various ways a documentary can affect your liking of a story. I think I'm looking forward to talking about that quite a lot. Yeah,
it certainly should be fascinating. And I think there's just so many different interesting topics that we're going to be able to discuss. So many releases of the past, ones to come in the future, and just lots of different things to be able to talk about.
Who the heck are you? Well?
I am usually referred to as the Master.
Oh, is that so?
Universally.
Well, I am Luigi Rossini, internationally, and conjurers I don't need, okay?
Unfortunately, I need you, Lew Russell.
What did you call me?
Lew Russell. It happens to be your real name.
Now, listen, mister. Get off my pitch while you're still safe.
You insolent primitive.
Oh, so you want it the hard way, do you? Right.
So today we come to our first big topic of the day, and it is of course the recently released Doctor Who The Collection Season 8 Blu-ray. This is the 8th season to be released so far in the almost 3-year period since the range first started. And as much as they've all been brilliant releases, I think it's fair to say that this is probably one of the best so far. Season 8, of course, was John Pertwee's second season as the Doctor and also featured the famous introduction of the Master. But we aren't here to talk about the stories. It's all about the release, the special features, the documentaries. And so, Ryan, I believe, like myself, you managed to pick up the box set and have been able to give lots of the new features a watch. What are your initial impressions on the box set?
I was absolutely looking forward to this. I mean, of course, season 8 is my favourite of the John Pertwee era, so the idea of that it getting a Blu-ray release was always got me excited. And yeah, I gave the whole thing a watch. I've watched all the new features, and I have to say I'm really impressed. I think it's one of the best of the range so far.
Yeah, definitely. So let's take a look at some of those new features in a little more detail. First up, I think let's have a little chat about the Terence and Me documentary, which I think was probably everyone's most anticipated documentary going into it. It's a wonderful tribute to Terence Dix, hosted by Frank Skinner, who you might remember as Perkins in Mummy on the Orient Express. Did you enjoy this heartfelt tribute to the great man, Ryan?
Yeah, it's actually my favourite of all the new documentaries on the set. It was definitely a great, fascinating insight into just what an extraordinary life Terence Dix had and the sort of the legacy that'll be left upon Doctor Who forever. And it's fascinating going into the insights of his family, his background history, and how he became involved in Doctor Who. So it was really interesting to see all the different perspectives from this documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was a great idea to bring in some Doctor Who writers to come and read their sort of original Target novels. I thought that was a really just fun way to do it, and just to remember the real sort of warm feeling of reading them as kids for a lot of them. And in particular, I thought that was a really nice piece where Frank went and met Barry Lett's son in that fish and chip shop where Terence and Barry used to go every week to have fish and chips together and sort of meet up. Even years after I'd worked on Doctor Who, I thought that was just a really sort of nice, poignant way to kind of sort of frame that. And also, I think just the fact that nobody really has a bad word to say about Terence Dix. Like, I feel like a lot of the documentaries about sort of the famous people of Doctor Who, and whether it's writers or actors or whatever, in general, because they're trying to sort of be quite in depth, a lot of the documentaries will find some things that are a little bit people less liked about these different actors. We even think about the first famous person like Tom Baker. Of course, he was so difficult to work with, particularly in his later years. Whereas you just get the impression talking to all these people about Terence that they just wasn't a bad word to say about him. No one didn't like him. He was such a wonderful man.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and just seeing all different perspectives, like Richard Mansfield, who Terence at Unisyd's Cambridge, and writers like Bob Baker and also Katie Manning popping up saying for her, Terence was Doctor Who for her. Him and Barry Letts, they were sort of the key figureheads of Doctor Who around that period, and just goes to show why their legacy has lasted as long as it has and will continue on for ages and ages.
100%, yeah, and I thought it was a wonderful way as well to conclude the documentary with that moment after we'd met Terence's widow, and then we got to see inside his sort of magical office, basically, that he'd spent the last 40 years working in, writing all of these Target novels and just different things for Doctor Who and many shows, but just sort of almost that like time capsule, it felt like, of all these old VHSs all across the walls, these little notes to himself about how to write and things and keep focus and stuff. I thought it was just such a fascinating, it felt like almost like we're being let into a secret, I thought, at the end there by seeing into this room. I thought it was such a great way to cap off the documentary.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think his widow, Elsa, is described as sort of like his own little personal world, his own TARDIS, so to speak.
Yeah,
and it was
exactly.
That ending, I think it kind of really got to me, just seeing like all the different, like him going into that room and just seeing all the different mountains and mountains of like books and VHSs. And I think there was some statues of Time Lords from the War Games on top of one of the shelves at one point.
Exactly.
It was really good.
It's like this. He was genuinely a Doctor Who fan. He wasn't just someone who comes and writes for it because it's a good thing to do or good for your career. He genuinely loved the show, and I think that's shown through all of his different writing across the show. Even you think just like him writing the Five Doctors, for example, the amount of challenges that he faced in doing that. But he was just such a great fan, and I think such a great man as well. And so, yeah, it was such a wonderful tribute, I thought, to Terence Dix. Our next documentary I thought we'd talk about was the one of the most ambitious documentaries I thought in this release. It was The Direct Route. Now, this saw two of the directors, Michael Bryant and Timothy Coombe, along with production assistant at the time and future director Graham Harper, as they visited several of the locations from the season in just the space of 3 days. It's fascinating to visit different locations and see the differences or similarities over the space of 50 years. So was this one of your favourites, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, Of course, the Terrence documentary was such a high point. That was the first one I watched, so it was interesting to see how the other documentaries would measure. And I thought this did a reasonably good job of having these, well, for the first half of it, these three important people going on different locations. And even when Tim Coon left about halfway through, and we were just left with Michael Bryant and Graham Harper, I still think they did manage to make it very fascinating and very insightful as they go to these different locations, like the old bar in Caldwell, where they shot that planet for Colony in Space. I just thought it was really interesting, and meeting the workman who was there at that time and was part of the demolition team. It was really interesting.
Yeah, no, I thought it was certainly something quite different. I know we've always sort of had the now and then features on the DVD range back in the day, kind of showing us, what some of the locations look like now. But I thought it just added that real extra dynamic, having the original directors going back to their locations and talking about what they did, why they chose to go there, and also then getting the opinions of directors from other stories saying, "Oh, this is a cracking location. I wish I'd worked on this Doctor Who story or something because it's such a good location." I thought that sort of way of doing it was really, really fascinating. I think that it was, as you mentioned, it's still just about worked only having Michael Bryant and Graham Harper towards the end. I think it was a little bit of a shame they couldn't have the three of them for all of the locations, and that in the end they weren't able to use Michael Ferguson as well, who of course directed Claws of Axos and is still with us. But I think it was just the dates and the timing wasn't quite working right for him to get involved with that. So there's a little bit of a shame, but I don't think it massively detracted from it. I think that using things like the massive drone shots, I thought just added such a scale to it and really gave just a new perspective and insight onto these different locations, because you were able to see them from above with such clarity and just a fascinating look at it, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And he also gave fascinating tidbits on stuff that I didn't even notice at the time, like when they went to that TV relay power station when they were shooting Terror of the Autods, and the idea that the two sort of radio dish towers, that there weren't two. I think it was only just one, and it had to be doubled as sort of like a glass shot. I didn't even know that. I always thought it was two different radio dish towers. But
yes,
the fact they just used this technique is just added a new perspective. I didn't know all this before, and so I thought this documentary did a really good job of diving deeper into those locations and how they sort of tweaked them to make it work within the context of the story in Doctor Who.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always fascinating with these sort of documentaries. You just get new insights, you find out new little tidbits and facts about them that can be really, really really fun, and just really develop your understanding of how they managed to pull these shows off back in 1971. This was really, so I think we can probably expect this to be a running series of documentaries like we've seen with the Doctor's Table and the Writer's Room series on the Blu-rays. I know Chris Chapman, the guy who's produced these documentaries, has mentioned that the direct route, where there is enough directors still living and enough locations to go to, I think that we will see a few more of these to come. And I think it's really, really interesting because it's fascinating to get that insight on these different locations.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I can't wait to see what they do more with this series.
Yeah, it's going to be really good, isn't it? So now next we come on to Devil's Weekend, a great documentary seeing Katie Manning and John Levine heading back to Aldbourne, the setting for the Demons. We get to meet people who were there to watch the filming back in 1971 and just get a fascinating look at some of the locations all over again. So Ryan, I thought it was as much as I guess to some extent it was overlapping with some of the content from the direct route, because that also featured them going to Aldbourne. But I felt that having Katie Manning and John Levine, two of the actors there, and sort of framing it on that perspective of meeting all these people who were, 5-year-old kids running around watching the filming at the time or getting in the background of shots or whatever, and their memories of that, I thought it gave a much more unique perspective on what it would have been like to be, a 6-year-old just seeing Doctor Who and co turn up in your little old village. It must have been crazy, really, I thought.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, after the Terrence and Me documentary, this was my other favourite documentary part of this set. I mean, The Demons has always been my favourite of the Pertwee era. Just seeing more about how they filmed that story, going to this village, and how the village of Aldbourne has sort of been really impacted by them filming Doctor Who there.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they let the kids outside to watch, because they knew the fact that, well, we were never going to get them to pay attention, so we might as well just let them go outside to watch the film.
Exactly.
Perfectly understandable back then.
Yeah, 100%. I really enjoyed that aspect to it. I also thought there was this lovely poignant moment, I thought it was, where we had Katie Manning and John Levine lying, I think it was on Devil's Hump, or one of those humps out there, sort of out in the countryside, just looking up as the sun was setting, and it just felt like a real poignant moment. You could tell they were feeling a little bit almost emotional, really, coming back there after all this time, and just remembering the great memories they had of the people they worked with and everything. I thought it was that was really one of those poignant, heartfelt moments of this documentary, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And she mentioned that she lost someone very close to her at the time. And it was this moment with John that felt like a real healing moment for her, and also a little bit prophetic by the fact that John said that after Doctor Who, he would always wanted to do the TV series of Wurzel Gummidge, wants to get it off the ground. And of course, he did afterwards.
Yeah.
He went on to do another iconic role. So it just goes to show how really special that moment was for both of them, really, and how it really cemented that iconic friendship.
Yeah, I love that. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And I think I just thought there were just such fun moments, like when there was that guy who was a kid there and always wanted to have a ride in Bessie, and then they got him as an adult there to go and do a little loop round in Bessie. I thought it was just, making people's dreams come true almost on Doctor Who documentaries. I thought it was a fantastic moment and just real fun. And I think that was really the vibe of this documentary. Is it's so heartwarming and so heartfelt, heartwarming, so much fun, so enjoyable, so sort of nostalgic, I guess, as well. I did really enjoy this. I wasn't sure about it beforehand, but watching it, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was really good. Definitely, I think it pretty much rivals the Tones to Me documentary as being like the best feature on this particular box set. Definitely.
Yeah. 100%, absolutely. So the last two features to cover are a staple of the range. First, the In Conversation with Katie Manning, a 75-minute long chat with Matthew Sweet about a wide-ranging set of topics around her career and life. Ryan, do you think we learnt a lot of new things from this chat, or was it a bit of, covering old ground all over again?
Well, I think with the Katie Manning conversation, I think it's pretty much become a big staple of the set at this point that with having Matthew Sweet on board to kind of to host the interviews and getting all these actors and directors and important people involved, I think I've pretty much come to expect that every time there is always something new. Even though we've heard some of these stories before, there's always something new to uncover. And I feel like we've learned a lot of new important information about Katie Manning that I don't think we ever really knew that much before. I mean, I don't think this documentary was necessarily about her being in Doctor Who. I don't think there was any much of that. I think it was pretty much all about Katie and all more important stuff about her background, like the fact that her uncle was I think he was a Marxist historian who I believe got arrested at the nuclear base for trespassing at one point, and how her father was a Tory candidate and was getting involved in miners' rights. And it was very interesting in the fact that her childhood friend was Liza Minnelli, who was the star of famous iconic star Judy Garland. Is the fact that we knew all this different information about her life that I don't think we knew that much about, all just sort of came to light here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, I don't know how widely it has been covered previously, but certainly I didn't know that much about that rather serious car accident she'd been in before she ended up working on Doctor Who. And I thought I don't think we'd ever really heard that much detail about that. But definitely, as you say, it feels, and a lot of these Matthew Sweet interviews are, which I think was fascinating, it feels much more of a talk about them as a person and their life, rather than just, oh yeah, you worked on Doctor Who, what was it like working with John Pertwee and all that, which has been covered a million times before. And so I think it's really nice we get these fresh insights, but also little tidbits into some of her time on Doctor Who. Like, for example, I thought it was interesting some of the stuff you talked about to do with Nick Courtney and the very, very close relationship that they formed with one another, and how you got the impression that they shared a lot of very sort of, private things with each other because they'd built such a close relationship on the show. And so I just thought that was one of those little insights that we didn't really know all that much about beforehand, that just always just adds a little bit more colour and understanding of what it was like back then on the show and in behind the scenes and things, and just gives that bit more context, which I always think is fascinating.
Yeah, I don't think it was afraid to show the sadder, darker times. It was unafraid of explaining that Nicholas Courtney apparently was being treated for depression, and then that Katie was sort of there to lend a helping hand to him, and the fact that she was getting these fan letters, and then one of shows sort of the darker side of the whole fan community, the fact that there was this one fan who was written to her that ended up taking his own life, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it just shows like even the most biggest of fan bases can have its sort of darker, more tragic side at times.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, maybe Doctor Who fandom has changed a lot over the course of 50 years, and the opportunities to interact with people through social media and forums now that they wouldn't have had back then is, of course, well, I think both a good and a bad thing in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, I certainly got a lot of enjoyment out of this interview. I thought that it was. I think they're all meant to be quite long. I thought at points maybe it dragged a little bit. It was a very long documentary. I did sit and watch it in one go, and it felt quite long and quite a lot in it. And it's not that it wasn't interesting, just it felt, some bits it felt like it was dragging on a little bit. So maybe they could have shortened it off a little bit or something like that. Or maybe I should have just watched it in 2 bits rather than trying to watch it all at once. That might have been a good idea as well. But yeah, so that's about that. And then the final kind of big new feature, a feature that we get in all the collection ranges now, of course, is the behind the sofa features. On this box set, they feature 3 socially distant sofas, featuring Janet Fielding and Sarah Sutton on the first one, Katie Manning and Stuart Bevan on the second, and Sacha Dhawan and Anjali Mahindra on the third. I think for me, it was certainly Sacha and Anjali that provided the most interesting sofa and reactions. What did you think of that, Ryan?
I 100% agree. I thought Angie and Sacha were pretty much the highlights. It's very interesting to hear their different points of view, hearing Angie talking about her experience of working with Katie and Nicholas through the Sarah Jane adventures. And then, of course, seeing Sacha Dhawan talking about how he got the role of the Master and how he tried not to watch too much of Classic Who in case he feared he was sort of ripping off other Masters' performance. And then comparing sort of his Master to Roger Delgado's was really interesting. The fact that we have the current incarnation talking about the original, I thought it was really fascinating. I thought those 2 were definitely the highlights of this particular Behind the Sofa series.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where they maybe it opens up a lot of opportunity. I think one of the most interesting things about the Behind the Sofa features is when you get people from New Who or much later time looking back on this. I remember enjoying on the season 10 box set where we had Phil Collinson, the producer from the RTD era, among others, talking about some of those stories and sort of remembering them as a child. But also, as you say, just seeing Sacha Dhawan, who's played the Master 50 years after it was originally created, and him being able to see what that was first like. I think in some ways it'll be interesting to see if it influences his performance when he inevitably turns up again in the show, as to whether, having now finally seen what the Master was like at the very beginning, whether he'll bring in a few sort of nods or references to that character. I think things like that could be really, really interesting. And I think they also did a good job of solving the COVID problem. I will talk about it a little bit more in a second, but in terms of using the screens, and so it still felt, obviously you could see it was different to the other ones, but I don't think it was too intrusive, and obviously worked well with Sacha and Gilly obviously being together, and so being able to sit together rather than having a screen between them, which was quite a nice opportunity there, I thought.
Yeah, definitely. I thought with everything with the COVID restriction, I thought they did a good way of trying to find different ways around it, and I feel like it did work in Katie, Stuart, and Sarah Janet's cases as well. So I thought they did a really good job of finding different ways around it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we'll sort of move away from that. I think the Behind the Sofas, they're always good. They're probably not my personal favourite features on the box sets. Like, I do enjoy them, but sort of more, I'm not maybe kind of 100% focused on them when I'm watching them all the time. Sometimes it's a bit of a case of, sitting on my phone a little bit while watching it, because there's interesting stuff in there, just it doesn't always 100%, keep me engaged. But I think that's also just because there's so many of them. And like, by the end of the range, in theory, we're going to have 156 of these for every story. So that's a lot of Behind the Sofas to watch.
I always found them to be entertaining. When I heard about this particular set, I was really excited, primarily because of the fact that we were getting Sacha and Anjali involved and hearing their perspectives, because I felt like that kind of shook things up, something a bit different. Of course, we do have the usual team of Sarah Sutton and Janet Fielding, and it was I think this is their 5th Behind the Sofa.
They've been on most of them, yeah.
And I feel like I expect them to be sort of like a sort of a double act at this point. And I feel like it was amusing, the fact that they were actually enjoying it, and sort of, though, and I remember at one point Janet was like, "Oh, this is they have a lot of explosions and action and stuff. They never had this in our days, Sarah. The fact that they're a little bit envious of the fact that the Pertwee era had all this amazing stuff, which, for me, given how very mixed in quality the Peter Davison era was in terms of quality, I can definitely understand how they feel.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, I think the main reason that we see so much of Janet and Sarah Sutton, particularly Janet, is because she lives so close to where they record them. I can't remember the name of the studios. I looked it up at one point, but basically she lives around the corner. So it's very easy to get her on and just, get her involved in all of these because it doesn't cost them anything probably to get her to travel there and all that. And so she's more willing to do it. So yeah, I think overall they're still an enjoyable part of the box set. And I think one other thing I just wanted to mention before we kind of finish this section was the impact of COVID on this box set and the sort of, the making of the features and things like that. I've done a fair bit of research listening to stuff from people like Chris Chapman about how this set came together. And essentially, season 8 was always going to be the next season when they started working on it, which was around Christmas of 2019. So nearly a year and a half ago now, they started working on this box set. And it probably would have been released in June or July last year, but for COVID. And it's just fascinating the way things worked out. Like the Direct Route, for example, documentary, they filmed about a week before lockdown happened. The first lockdown happened back in March of last year. That's why there's shots, of course, of the three of them in a taxi together, which you could never do now. That would be, at the moment, there'd be no chance of doing that. So that's why they really got away with one there, because you probably just couldn't really have done that feature in the same way if they'd had to do it under socially distanced conditions. So I thought they got pretty lucky there. And like with Terence and Me and the Devil's Weekend, I think you can see at points, people are a little bit more spaced out, or there's the odd reference to COVID or whatever. But I think the key thing was that it doesn't you don't particularly notice it. It doesn't particularly impact on the box set. And I know that the producers talked a lot about how they didn't want it to be everybody to remember, season 8, that was the COVID box set where everything was a bit bad, a bit ruined because they're all just Zoom calls because they couldn't do it properly and things like that. So I thought that it was great they were willing to wait until the restrictions had released enough to be able to go and film these things properly in person and give us something really to sort of unimpacted by COVID to enjoy. I mean, Ryan, did you feel sort of similar that it didn't feel too impacted by COVID particularly?
I don't think it did. I think there was only one Zoom call. I think it was on the Turn to Be box set when Frank was chatting with Bob Baker. I think that was like the only Zoom call. But apart from that, I mean, even though we do see like passing people on the street wearing masks and so forth, I don't think it intruded the documentaries whatsoever. I don't think it made that huge of an impact.
Exactly, and in some ways, probably because they had more time to work on this box set. When we look at things like audio and picture restoration, they probably were able to do more. I know Mark Ayres, who does all the sound for this, talked about how having the opportunity to do more experimentation through the lockdown periods meant actually he probably came up with better solutions and was able to improve the audio even more than what would have been the case if it had just been released as normal.
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe that extra time at home, I think it really gave them the chance to really give these sets the real proper presentation I think they deserve, definitely.
So, Ryan, final thoughts? A very strong box set, do you think, season 8?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely one of the best of the Blu-ray range, definitely. And I think it rivals, I think season 12 and 14 as sort of being the very best. And I just can't wait to see what they do from there. I mean, I hope some of my other favourite seasons, like season 13, get the same time and love that this one definitely got.
Well, I'm sure they will, given the amount of effort they're putting into seasons like 24 and seasons like that. I'm sure they're going to put enough effort into the ones that are really good as well. So it's certainly overall a fantastic set, well worth the cost, even if it's probably a little bit hard to get hold of at the moment, but we'll talk more about that later. So as part of the pod, I always like to have a little chat about the VAM we've been watching recently, and the stories, of course, as well. So let's start with you, Charlie. What have there been any recent stories or documentaries you've been watching?
Yes, recently I've watched Time in the Rani, which is one of the least liked Doctor Who stories ever. I've got to say, I don't really think it deserves the huge amounts of hate it gets. It's not my favourite story by any means, but I don't think it ranks in my bottom 10 or even 20 probably. It's just kind of in the middle. And yeah, it had some pretty interesting stuff. It had a documentary about the CGI they used for the opening title sequence. Before them, they just used visual effects and things like that, but now they're using CGI, and that was quite interesting. And yeah, they had some commentaries as well. I quite enjoyed them. And and they had the this documentary about how Doctor Who was almost coming to an end. Like everyone sort of anticipated 24 to be the last season, but actually it continued for another 2 after that. It was pretty interesting. And oh yes, Spearhead from Space as well. I watched that recently, and I really enjoyed that. There's this sort of unit recruitment film, which I think that's quite funny. It's very like sort of parody. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, apart from season 8, I've been catch up with some of the season 24 stories in kind of preparation for this new box set that's coming out. And yeah, Charlie, Time of the Rani, that was a real funny one, wasn't it? Really interesting. But I've just caught up on Delta and the Bannerman, which I always feel like is the most special one of season 24 because of the fact that it's not great, but yeah, I kind of love it because of just how so weird and bizarre it is. And it's a shame that there's like no real behind the scenes documentary on the DVD, which one of the reasons why I'm looking forward to the season 24 box set coming out soon is the fact that we are finally getting a documentary about this particular story.
Yeah, exactly. I think it'll be good to. I think that's what they've tried to do with a lot of the collection box sets is kind of cover off stories that didn't have a good making of or behind the scenes sort of information. I think they've tried to really cover that off, and in most stories, I know season 19 in particular had a load of new making of documentaries because hardly any of those stories got them originally. That's some really interesting ones. I mean, I've most recently been watching season 18, just started season 19 in my marathon. So I finally, 2 years late, got around to watching a lot of the season 18 special features. And there was certainly some good stuff on there. Some of the documentary, the new making of Logopolis was really, really interesting, and lots of sort of stuff on there about it. I also watched the older one as well, which wasn't bad, but it was really nice to see that new making of where they visit the old locations and just have a general chit chat about the story. I thought that was really, really good, even if I don't think Logopolis is one of the best stories ever. I know it's Tom's last, but let's be real, it's okay, but it's I don't know, it's just not my kind of story that much. All this sort of in-depth sciencey mumbo jumbo that Christopher Bidmead brought in was not some of my favourite stuff.
Yeah, he was known for doing a lot and lots of techno babble during that time.
Indeed, exactly. But then, of course, I've got to watch K9 and Company as well because that's on the final disc of season 18, which was great fun. I hadn't seen it for years, K9 and Company, so that was really good fun. And they did a behind the sofa on that as well, which was actually really, really good. Just seeing them all react to it.
That was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's. The titles are just iconic. I mean, the music is bizarre, but I just feel like it's iconic for that reason, to be honest. And yeah, it's a bit of fun. I would have been interested to see where it had gone if it had an actual series, but I'm also not quite sure what it really would have been. I don't really see quite where it sort of. It's not really sci-fi. It's got K9 in it, but it was all just sort of fake sort of satanic worship and all that stuff. It wasn't really about an alien or anything, so I don't quite see where that would have ended up. So but it was still an interesting watch. And yeah, of course, they had some interesting features on there, and also the writers' room, which is quite a good one, where you get the writers from the series sitting in a pub and talking about the show, which I don't know how easily they can do at the moment, but certainly on season 18 it was good fun because I think four of the writers were still with us, which was a really which gave us a really good insight into lots of the stories from that season. So yeah, that was my kind of my recent Doctor Who travails, and I've recently watched Castrovalva, which was awful, I have to be honest. Maybe that's a controversial opinion, but I really didn't enjoy Castrovalva.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, dropping bombs here on site. It was just really long and boring, and it didn't feel like very much happened. Like there's a whole episode of just the Doctor in a coffin or being carried around a forest. That's basically the whole of episode 2. Like there's just nothing to it.
I mean, I do like the ideas behind it. I think I love the concepts of it, but I always found part 2 and the early stuff of part 3 to just be too drawn out. But I do love part one. I think part one is really
Yes.
interesting. The fact that
I'll
it's
give it
just
that.
them in the TARDIS.
I'll give them that. Have you ever seen Castrovalva, Charlie?
I have, and I actually really disagree with you, Elliot. Sorry,
No, go for it.
I absolutely love Castrovalva, to be honest. I do agree it absolutely drags in the middle, and I'd go as far to say I dislike episode 2, but I think, towards the end especially, it really does pick up. I quite like it.
No, fair enough. I think for me, almost one of the problems with it is that it's kind of the first clearest indications we see of the Master kind of not really being a character anymore and just being evil crazy man with mad plan to kill the Doctor, that kind of becomes a theme of the 80s, where you feel like earlier on there's at least a little bit more substance and motive. I know he's always a bit just, I want to take over the Earth or whatever, but it just feels it's just him running around maniacally laughing and being evil for the sake of being evil. So I don't know, I didn't love that.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he goes so far as to create like this own world of Castrovalva, it's like, surely there could be less extravagant plans on trapping the Doctor. Surely, without having to create a whole world with different people in it.
It's a fairly convoluted way to try and kill the Doctor or whatever he really wanted to achieve. But I guess the Master likes his slightly wacky plans, so I guess it kind of fits into character. But yeah, anyway, I'll be watching the special feature on that soon. I just haven't got around to it yet. But I think there's about 4 hours of bonus features on the season 19 disc for that, so that'll be a good fun watch coming up soon for me.
The new effects on that is really well done. I really recommend checking out it with the new effects.
Yeah, I'll have to have a look at that as well. I don't think I did first time round, but I'll have a watch of some of that, sort of speed through it and look out for some of those new effects as well. That'll be definitely good fun. So next up, our next big topic of the day is we're talking about the cover arc. And I know, Charlie, this is a sort of topic you have a particular interest in. It's the cover art for various releases. Now, if you think all the way back to the VHS days, we've had literally hundreds of releases of VHS, DVD, now Blu-ray, and therefore hundreds of cover art since then. It means we've obviously had a rather wide-ranging quality of these covers, particularly in the earlier days. So we thought we'd have a little chat about our favourite and least favourite artworks from over the years. So Charlie, what for you are some of the more memorable artwork from the various DVDs, Blu-rays, VHS, whatever?
Well, like most Doctor Who fans, I'm a huge fan of Lee Binding, who's done quite a few DVD releases and obviously the Blu-ray collection box sets. And my favourite ones of his are probably like Frontios. I really enjoy that. Death to the Daleks, Day of the Daleks.
Oh yeah.
Those two stories, they look really nice. Just the front cover, it's very explosive and epic, like the Third Doctor's era was. And not just Lee Binding as well, like Enemy of the World. I really love that cover. And in terms of the not so good ones, I probably have to go with like Colony in Space, the DVD. That is amazing. It's just sort of the Doctor and the Master in a spaceship, really weirdly edited. And the Visitation standard edition, which it looks a bit odd. But Lee Binding, I think, is definitely the best artist.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the covers have taken a real a change through time, where even looking at the earlier DVD range, as you mentioned, things like The Visitation or the original Spearhead from Space DVD, I think the original Robots of Death as well, where it felt like all they could think of was, let's stick a promotional photo on the front cover and that'll do. It sort of has developed quite a long way from that, where actually now, you've got Lee Binding coming up with great artwork using different assets, different bits of different promo photos, creating it all together in a piece of artwork rather than just a photo slapped on the front of a DVD or something, I think. So, yeah, Ryan, what have you got any ones you picked out in particular that you like or dislike?
Well, I completely agree with Charlie. I think Lee Binding's artwork is just absolutely amazing. Colony in Space was not very good, but I suppose all artists have their off days, I suppose. But I think the Blue range, the collection Blu-rays, I think are some of Lee Binding's best work. I think they're just really eye-catching covers that really sums up that particular series. I just thought he did such a really good job with that. In terms of worst ones, I agree. Some of those early ones where you had like Spearhead from Space or Members of the Daleks, the fact they just put a promo picture on it felt a little bit bland. But I do think one of my least favourites, was the old release of Time Flight on DVD. I just feel like it's such a not a very good cover. I mean, I like Clayton Hickman's some of the stuff he's done for the early DVDs, but I feel like that was his. I just didn't think that was very good because it just feels like a slapdash Photoshop image where some of the colors don't look as though they're correctly done and the pictures don't align well. I just feel like it was. I feel like that was. It felt very last minute, that cover. The fact that they just slapped something together. But in a way, it's sort of been appropriate. It's kind of a shoddy cover to a pretty shoddy story.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I have seen that cover for a while, but looking at it, yeah, you're right. It looks like a few pretty shoddy photoshops of characters and, as you say, colours that don't fully fit with each other. Yeah, as I say, Clayton definitely did some good stuff, but that's probably, you know, not some of his best work, I think it's fair to say. But yeah, I think also we should mention the Steelbook Blu-ray releases we've had recently for the new series. I know Lee Binding. I think there's been a few different people who've done some of the covers for that. I think Sophie Cowdray did some of them as well, I think. But I think they, as much as because different artists have done some of them, there maybe hasn't always been the most consistent styling of the covers. But I still think in general the artwork has been fantastic on all of those Blu-rays. I think they've all been, you know, a real step up in that sort of, you know, artwork and not just slapping edited promo photos on the front of covers like we used to see in the past. I think that's really made a big difference, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think that, you know, I hope that going forwards we're only really going to get better covers rather than worse ones. We're sort of past the days of promo photos and dodgy artwork put together. I think there were some VHSs back in the day that sort of had, you know, like a Cyberman from the wrong Cyberman story on the cover or something like that, where it's just fairly basic things that they just haven't got right at all, which, you know, is probably not ideal at points really there, but yeah, I always think it's always real fun, and it can always get you really excited when they first announce that new release, whether it's a collection Blu-ray or something else, and you see this wonderful cover art that just gets you really excited to see it on the shelf, really. I think as well, when you're able to finally get hold of it, I think it's tremendously exciting. So yeah, have you got any other ones you want to mention, Charlie, at all?
I don't know if Big Finish counts at all, but
yeah, no, feel free, please go for it, absolutely.
In Doctor Who magazine, I think it was a couple of months ago now, then it was all about the artwork of Doctor Who, and obviously I really enjoyed that because this was a topic I like so much. And there's one artist, Anthony Lamb, who he like edits the photos and creates really nice Big Finish covers that it's crazy. They look like they're moving, sort of. There was one, I can't remember what it's called, and it has like Sutek with I think it's the like Sixth Doctor or something on some
okay. Oh yeah.
Space travel. Yeah. And he just says I'm pretty sure there was one Fourth Doctor story where he like mashed together like 10 different images of Tom Baker and compiled them into one image, because obviously there's only so many pictures of the actors that sometimes they need to improvise and mix them up, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's always presents new opportunities really when you've got, certainly with Big Finish and the likes, where you have kind of new combinations of different monsters that never faced that Doctor originally, and plucking out the right promo image, particularly for Big Finish when you've got no visuals. It's sort of, they have a free reign to really choose whatever image they want to use to represent that Doctor or that alien or whatever, and I think that's probably to their advantage at points, whereas sometimes you can be a bit limited with particularly some of the DVD range and the earlier ones, where probably there wasn't always that many photos to work with to be able to create good covers from, because simply back in, you know, the 60s or the 70s, they didn't always take as many photos or good photos from the right angle that already work on a cover. So yeah, I think it's definitely a fascinating topic, and I'm sure we'll revisit it at points when we come across new releases and things and looking at the covers of them as well. I think it'll be really interesting. Is there anything else you guys wanted to say about that?
I'll just quickly say one thing.
Go for
it. One of my favorite covers was like an old video release of Sharda. I uncovered this when I was visiting the Empire Exchange in Manchester. There was such a great VHS cover for Sharda. The fact that you had Tom Baker, and then you had behind it these old Polaroid stills and these old
yes, I can see that, yeah,
pad reels and the film slates as well. It's like it get that feel like, wow, we're about to uncover like this secret that the BBC have, and we're finally revealing it. And it's just, I thought it was such an eye-catching cover, and but I think, an appropriate cover for such I think, a fascinating story that hopefully we'll talk at great length about in the future.
Yeah, no, we definitely will. I mean, it's a fascinating cover, and probably they needed to make it so good to get people to buy it because it wasn't actually a proper story. But maybe that's why. But yeah, certainly it's a fascinating cover. I'd recommend, if you haven't seen it before, do go look it up on Google or whatever, because it's a really, really unique one, I think. Yeah, so that brings us towards the end of the first episode of Ker-VAM, and the plan is always to end the podcast by just quickly looking at the upcoming releases of Doctor Who physical media. So hopefully, if I get this up on the right day, which will be Monday the 19th of April, today should be the day that the Series 8 Steelbook is released, basically a re-release of the Series 8 Blu-ray, but the new Steelbook box and packaging and things for it, which is still really cool and certainly something I'm going to be getting hold of because, I'm a bit bad with steelbooks. I get them all really. So, but I think it will finally complete my collection of steelbooks. I will finally have series 1 to 12 in steelbook format because I managed to get the series 9 one back in the day before that went out of print and is disastrously expensive on eBay and the likes now. So there we go. And of course, the other big reasonably big release coming up is at the end of May, 31st of May, is the season 12 and 19 re-releases, which I'll talk more about in future and in a future podcast, really. But it's essentially just they're re-releasing these box sets in standard packaging, or whatever they call it, which I think is a good way for people who missed out on it the first time round to actually have an opportunity to get it, because there's been so much, sort of complaints from people about, particularly season 12, when it was such a limited run, and then they reprinted it and people weren't able to get hold of it, and it's just been a bit of a mess. So I think that what looks like something they're going to be continuing down the line in terms of re-releasing these box sets sort of 2 to 3 years after the limited edition range and limited edition packaging, I think it's a great way just to open up these box sets to a new range of people who aren't, quite so interested in spending 50 quid on a really expensive one and want to spend 35 on just all the features, but in slightly less extravagant packaging, shall we say. And then the other couple of releases coming up, which we don't have a date for yet, are the season 24 box set, which we'll talk about more in the future as well, and the Web of Fear animation, which is coming up at some point, episode 3 animation, of course, because presumably we're never going to get that film can back that Philip Morris lost or something in returning the Web of Fear from Nigeria when they first found them, when it was meant he found all 6, and then it was only 5 when it came back to the UK. So that's why we're going to end up with an animated episode of that. But that should still be a great release, I think, as well. Is there any of those in particular you guys are looking forward to coming up?
Well, obviously, I'm really looking forward to the Web of Fear because I feel like that's one of the best stories of the Troughton year, and the fact that we're finally going to get it complete with visuals and not just an audio and one episode with audio, I think is a really great way of completing such a great iconic story. And I can't wait to see what the Steelbook is going to look like, especially to see what artwork they got planned for that.
Yeah, that's going to be really cool. And Charlie, you hoping to get hold of any of these ones?
Absolutely. I agree with you there, Ryan. I'm really looking forward to the Web of Fear. I think it's going to be great. It seems like a very good story. I've watched a couple of episodes of the DVD. And I just really like the animation in general, like Faceless One's Macro Terror. I both have, and they're really good. And the Moon Base, where 2 episodes are animated. I really like the concept of animating missing episodes in general. I'm really looking forward to the Web of Fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably on our next podcast, we're going to have a deep dive into the animation range, how it all started, why we didn't have any for 7 years, and now why we're suddenly getting them every year now. I think it's going to be really, really interesting. And speaking of those animations, of course, a quick piece of news is rumours surfaced, well, today when we're recording, but a couple of days ago, about the animation of Evil of the Daleks, which we had rumours about this last year in all the tabloids. They were all like, suddenly, Evil of the Daleks and Abominable Snowmen is going to get animated and it's all going to happen. And yet, 9 months later, from those initial rumours, we still had no announcement of anything. But very recently, somebody discovered what seems to be official test footage of the animation on YouTube from the story, which seems to all but confirm it'll be released in the near future, I'd say, guys. So if of course, this does prove to be true, would you guys be excited and looking forward to an Evil of the Daleks animation coming up? Yeah,
absolutely. Evil of the Daleks, I think, is, along with Power of the Dogs, is just 2 great Troughton stories, and 2 great Dalek stories in general. I've always wanted to see like a full animation of that because I think it's such a great story, and also the Abominable Snowmen I think is a great addition to that as well. So it didn't really surprise me that of the next stories that we're going to get the animation treatment, these would be the ones that would be next, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And Charlie, any thoughts on the upcoming animations potentially?
I think that Evil of the Daleks and Abominable Snowmen would be the most likely candidates for the next animation, since obviously if they do those 2, then it would complete the entire run of Companion Victoria.
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't know, I can just see them doing that. They've done a lot of season 5 stories recently. So, yeah, and obviously Evil of the Daleks is just really iconic. You know, I've always wanted to watch it. It looks really good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have put myself through the 6 episodes of reconstructions of Evil of the Daleks, which it was good, but I feel like at the moment, if I had to pick between Power and Evil of the Daleks, I'd prefer Power, but that's probably because I've seen animation of that, and I haven't of Evil of the Daleks, so I very much look forward to what they can do with an animation of that. I think it's a story that certainly would sell well if and when they come round to it, and I think, you know, these rumours and this footage appearing on YouTube seems to certainly suggest that we might be getting it. Whether it's this year or it's early next year, who knows? We'll have to wait until they announce it, really, but it should be exciting to look forward to, I think. But that is about it from Ker-VAM, our first episode. So thank you very much for listening for our first ever episode. Thank you, Ryan and Charlie. Did you guys enjoy it? Have a good bit of fun with this?
Yeah, I had a good time, definitely. What about you, Charlie?
I really enjoyed this. I'm very happy to be doing this podcast with you, Elliot and Ryan. It's been lots of fun.
Yeah, and I'm certainly looking forward to getting cracking with the next one. So please do go check us out on Twitter at Ker-VAM Pod. And I'm not 100% sure yet whether I'll have got this onto the podcasting services in time. But if you're watching on YouTube, please do leave a like and a comment on what you enjoyed as well. So please do join us again in 3 weeks' time, fingers crossed, where we'll be discussing the fascinating history of animations of Missing Doctor Who, plus a few more thoughts after we've given a few here today on what might be coming next. So please do join us again on the next episode of Ker-VAM.